Good evening, everyone. Wow, it's really wonderful to see you all here. My name is Monika Szewczyk. I'm the Audain Chief Curator here at the Polygon Gallery and the co-curator of Tania Willard, Photolithics, with the moderator of tonight's conversation between Tania and Dana Claxton, Serena Steel to my right here. As we begin, I would like to consider more fully our presence here in the beautiful Squamish village of Eslahan, amidst the broader territories of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh nations and the Musqueam Band. This evening is co-sponsored by the Critical Image Forum out at UBC, and also it is co-presented with the Capture Photography Festival as part of the Distinguished Speaker Series of Capture. And I wanted to invite Emmy Lee Wall to say a few words before I introduce the speakers.
Thank you, Monika. She said I have to stand on this podium even though I didn't want to. Thanks so much, everyone, for being here tonight at the Polygon Gallery for a conversation between Tania and Dana. I want to start by acknowledging our great privilege in living and working on the ancestral and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. And just in light of so many conflicts that are happening around the world right now, I'm really deeply grateful to live here. I have a few thank yous before I hand over the podium back to Monika. I want to sincerely thank the Polygon Gallery for being such amazing hosts and collaborators and welcoming us all here. Thank you to Reed, Monika, Elliot, Serena, Michael, Carrie, and Jen for your genuinely warm engagement. We are deeply grateful. We're also partnering with the Critical Image Forum, as Monika mentioned. It's great to have another ally in the city that is investigating the power of the imagery that surrounds us all daily. To Althea and Kelly, thank you for championing these important conversations for our community and for supporting this talk in particular. And then just a quick shout out to our staff at Capture, to Sarah and William who organized this talk from Capture's side. Thank you for handling all the moving parts with such grace and aptitude. This year, Capture includes featured exhibitions at the Audain Art Museum, the Gibson Museum at SFU, the Vancouver Art Gallery, and of course here at the Polygon Gallery with Tania's exhibition, which is truly remarkable. Congratulations to Tania, Monika, and Serena on such a thoughtful and engaging project. Tania and Dana, our speakers tonight, have both participated in Capture in past years. Tania's work was installed in the Canada Line in 2017. And in 2019, she wrote a text for Christabel Stewart's Dalgrauer installation that was published in our catalog. Dana also installed as a public art piece on Canada Line in 2015, and her work was part of a group exhibition at the Gordon Smith Gallery that we curated as a featured exhibition last year. And Dana also selected a Film for Artists selection series at the Cinematheque this year, so we've been keeping you very busy. So I'm really thrilled to welcome you back here tonight for the Speaker Series event. Thank you both for your long engagement with the festival and for being here tonight. I want to express appreciation to the Michael and Ian O'Brien Family Foundation that supported our Speaker Series in 2026. And I want to specifically thank TD Bank, which is also Capture's presenting sponsor. And we're incredibly indebted to TD for their commitment to art and the platform it provides to amplify diverse voices. And finally, Capture's on until April 30th, and we're back here that night to wrap up the festival with a closing event that celebrates the launch of a book on the life and work of Diane Evans. So I hope you'll join us back again that evening.
Thank you and welcome to everyone who came out tonight. It is quite a packed room, which is incredible. I'm very grateful to be here today with these two incredible artists and curators alongside all the many other roles that you each hold in your lives. Both of you have incredibly expansive practices spanning across multiple disciplines, and I'm really excited to learn a bit more about the ways that you think about images, both in the making and curating of them. So I'm just gonna jump right in. Each of you approach photography in your practices in quite different ways, but a common theme that I see across both of your works is that engagement with light. Tania, your use of light in your window vinyl works, such as Safe Light here and Basket Citation, and Dana, your use of light in your backlit firebox images. It would be wonderful if you could share a little bit about your general use of photography and approach, as well as how the importance of light makes an impact on how you create and understand your work.
Whoever's ready first. I forgot. Okay, there we go. I was like, did I turn it on? Thank you, Serena, Cooksjam, and Monika, and Emmy. Yeah, I mean, I think it's so interesting to have this conversation because I feel like I've been working with light in different ways, but in some ways, seeing Dana's work and having an early, a chance to connect with your work is definitely an influence. So it's great to be sitting here with you in conversation about the show. I think like we have different approaches in terms of the kinds of imagery we're making, and I think like you're so skilled and the works are so gorgeous. And I think what I've been doing is trying to understand an image in a different way through alternative process photography. I feel like a lot of this work in the show started in response to being on my land in Secwepemc territories. I'm from the Nisconlith community, and really having a chance to think through the ways that light was affecting not only an image, but like myself, my family, things we grow, things we harvest, things we caretake for. I live in a rural area and surrounded by forest, and I live on Nisconlith Indian Reserve, and so the politics of this province, of this country, and the Indian Act are ever present, as well as superseding that, the land itself. And I think being held there by my land has changed the way I approach an image. And I'm in the exhibition, I'm also thinking about historical images and approaching photography through the elemental and through thinking through land has really helped me sort of rationalize and think through, decode, and also disrupt a photograph. And that's the way I approach my own work, as well as thinking about historical images. And we'll talk about more about that, I'm sure. But yeah, that's how I'm sort of approaching it. I think that's what really changed for me is approaching images, is to think through the ways in which my land holds me. And by my land, I mean, Secwepemc people since time immemorial, and my mom's side of the family, and the ways that settler Canadians have arrived and how that's connected to family. And so all of that is intertwined for me in photography.
Hello. Oh, it works. Thank you, everyone, for being here, and thank you for the lovely introductions. And thank you for that question and also your answer, because thinking how my work is so studio-based, and I've never really, well, other than, I do shoot landscape when I go home, or, and, the street photography that from the Paris book, but generally, I really like being in the studio, and so it's completely, artificial in some ways. It's artificial light, but it's such artificial light, but at the same time, we're trying to create natural light. And so I work with very skilled photographers and gaffers and lighting people. Henry Robideau, I don't think he's here, but amazing fellow to work with, as well as Jeff. But and Henry always says to me, the best light is the natural world light. So that's what we try to recreate when we're in the studio with this lighting. So it's quite the opposite, really, thinking about processes. And, you're working with the sun, for instance. That's where you're gathering the light from the sun. And when I'm in the studio, we're trying to recreate the sun. And but the one thing about making the fireboxes is that I was thinking about the elements, of course, and the history of the light box in Vancouver, and of course it has this extensive history. I've been completely inspired by the photo conceptualists and the firebox, and at where I get them fabricated, they call it the Rodney. That's what that box is called. It's called the Rodney, and I'm inspired by these fellows. But when I realized that I could call mine a firebox, because I sat on the negatives for about 4 years because I was unsure about really what to do. And then when I realized that I could do it, but I did think about in terms of the kind of extraction it takes to make these things, and then that sort of slows you down a bit, and you think about what's really being extracted for me to make this work, and so I'm thinking of certainly environmental impact and those kind of things, but it's really quite a different process.
Yeah, I remember the showing of those firebox works at Audain, SFU Audain Gallery, and I remember just being blown away by them. But I also remember you in thanking at the end of a discussion when you thanked the makers, but you also thanked all these elements that even the aluminum. And so in that moment, I hadn't had a chance to think through exactly what you're talking about, everything that is going into the materiality of that work in all its different, iterations in terms of from the elemental to the industrial. And I really carry that exhibition and that many things that you've said actually in our different times that we've intersected and overlapped.
Thank you. It's really interesting to hear about just how kind of at the opposite ends of the spectrum of control of light each of your practices is at. I'd be curious to hear about how you love or struggle with that aspect of control in your process. Is it something that you embrace? Do you love to be able to specify each of the details? I'd be curious about that aspect in terms of light or other materials.
It is, I was thinking, it's all about control. But I mean, it really is, when you're making studio art, your studio photography, it's all about having control over those lights, but also as somebody who I can take my 35 millimeter camera out, or my I've shot on everything really, and I shot recently, well not recently, but about 4 years ago, I've shot 2 series on disposable 35 mil cameras and blew them up really large just to get the grain, and the one thing, and especially working with Henry, and I also worked with Robert Kezier on larger projects like 8x10s or larger, is that it's really important that if you're working with a technical team, that you always look through the viewfinder and you click. And it's just, you can't let another photographer click for you. And so I worked with one photographer, and they were really surprised that I wasn't going to let them click. And I was like, no, you can't click, this is, and I know that it might sound funny and frivolous, but it's so true. And you have to be there, breathing over there, making sure that, for one, compositionally it's there. And because say, for instance, I don't think it's up here, but Lasso or all of that Indian Pony series, it was meant to be on this wide open plains, the Wild West, the wild open plains. And so one photographer said, why are you wasting all that space? Why have you shot it that way? And so that was my, composition and how I want to shoot it. So it's just really important when you're working with a larger team, a technical team, that you control the click.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking we're gonna have very different approaches in this realm as well, because I think I am maybe the opposite end of the spectrum in terms of letting all these kinds of elemental things creep in. If I'm doing sun printing, I'm thinking of them as collaborative. In the past, I've called some of those series sovereign sun prints, and thinking about the light on Indigenous territory on my Secwepemc home, and really thinking through land rights and land in different ways. And so I'm letting things happen to an image. So when I'm doing a cyanotype or an anthotype, it's very hard for me to control it. I guess some people do have more levels of control, but I'm like, if the rain happens, if like the print gets dirty, if my kids are involved, I have to, that's just like the process informs the image. It's all part of the making of it. And I so love Dana's work and seeing that level of technical skill and beauty that is absolutely her that comes through in the work. And they're so expansive. And in my approach, I'm thinking of letting go of so much. And so I think maybe the only thing I'm really controlling is the medium I'm choosing and, where particularly I'm developing the image. But sometimes I'm just literally developing the image on a, very dilapidated picnic table, and I'm rinsing it with a garden hose, and, sometimes I use like an old cooler to rinse it out in, or a tub of like a bin of some kind. And I guess it's because of that immediacy as well. So I think one thing that I carry with me that's shifted in my practice since I was previously here in these territories is a responsiveness that is really important to me. So being responsive to the ecologies around me, responsive to community, but also responsive to, weathering, responsive to maybe I can't make the print that day for, a number of reasons because I'm planting something or there's time to harvest something else. And so instead of being disappointed maybe with sometimes your plans getting changed, I really shifted to just thinking through being responsive and like allowing my control and my plans to just shift and change. That's also due to parenting and having plans that I just can't achieve anyway.
Thank you both. I think another kind of similarity in your work, although again used in completely different ways that I've noticed, is this act of concealment that you use in your images, particularly Tania with your through and through works used over landscape photography, and Dana, your headdress series used more in portraiture. So I'd be curious to find out what this obscuring is doing for you, how you're using it as a tool in your images.
Well, maybe I can talk about, Monika mentioned reading the Nanitch essay. And so I co-curated with Heather Caverhill and Helga Pakasar an exhibition at then Presentation House Gallery. And we were working with the Uno Langman BC Historical Photography Collection, which is housed at Special Collections at UBC. And we had sort of 4 days. That collection has like 80,000 photographs in it, which is sort of an impossible task, but we were really kind of approaching things intuitively, seeing what was there, highlighting things. It was quite an engaging process to have that constriction of time. But then I wasn't prepared at the time for how impactful it would be to see this particular, period of rapid colonization and extreme forms of that, clear-cut landscapes of giant trees and images, so many images of Indigenous people, but not by Indigenous people. And that, I wasn't expecting, I wasn't expecting quite to feel it on such a deep level. And so then I was, encountering images, of course, of also residential school, and those are such painful images. But we wanted to not exclude them, and so I used some different like frosted glass and cedar, so that when we showed those images, they were, the sensitivity of them was respected. The fact that, of course, there's so many considerations about the peoples who could consent at that time, and also their images of children. And so that was maybe the first time I had started to shield an image in that way. And then that came through later in these different approaches using ulexite, which is sometimes called TV stone. And it has this interesting fiber optic quality, if you get a chance to see it. It's sort of, because of the structure, that's mineral structure up and down, it's yeah, like a natural fiber optic, so it carries the image to like the surface of this transparent stone, but is also obscured by its, by its entire time on Earth. So there's cracks. It's actually quite a soft type of stone. And I started to photograph through it, kind of amazed at this optical quality. I mean, fiber optics really inform a lot of our communications today, but this is a rudimentary mineral form. And so I started to kind of think about it helping me see, and as a device for looking, as a device for understanding through these kinds of crystal forms and this deep time.
Hearing about Tania's process, your processes. It's lovely to hear you talk about them. I guess for me, in terms of the concealment, is that, that work is informed by many things. And I'm informed by Vancouver art. I was informed by actually Elizabeth Zogner. I was informed by Douglas Copeland. I was informed by Raven Chacon. I was informed by people wanting to look at indigenous beadwork, aggressively, and then also thinking about ceremonial culture where you're covered, and so that's really sort of the basis of that work. It starts there culturally and ceremonially and spiritually, and then all of these other influences come into it. And so I wasn't necessarily thinking I'm going to ask these women to sit for me to conceal who they are, or veil them as a sign of a nod to oppression, or the different sort of analysis that people have read into it, and people should read into whatever they're seeing, right? But that wasn't my intention at all in terms of any kind of hiding the figure, because the figure could always see through all of that. See the shields of the beadwork, she could see through them. And so it is kind of a shield, but also inverting the headdress, or the war bonnet as we call them. And, it was also a nod to the politics of who gets to wear a war bonnet, and, and the, asking people not to wear them. And they feel beautiful, they're made beautifully, but they're really in our culture only for certain people to wear. So I was just inverting that idea as well. And, but I think culturally, there's things that come out in our work, and then there's things that will never be known to the viewer. And that's okay too. Like, I think I conceal those kind of things. Just looking here at Water Speak, when was that, 2000? And so that was in situ at Art Speak. And so thinking about, the lovely analysis of Art Speak as well, but thinking about, Water Speak, and coming from a Sundance culture, and what it means to have a relationship with water and the natural world. So there's those kind of relationships that are the foundation of the work, and then all the other layering gets applied in terms of being influenced by contemporary art, the avant-garde, history of video art, and just how artists are influenced by everything. But the foundation is cultural knowledge, really. And so, and I see that in Tania's work, especially the work that's on exhibition now, is that there's this, I don't want to say a suggestion, but it's imbued with cultural knowledge, and it just exists there, I think, because when you have part of that being part of your identity and your culture and the way you live and the way you want to walk in the world, it gets infused in the work.
Thank you. Yes, there's something very powerful about deciding which parts of your stories and your histories and cultures that you want to share. And there are so many things that are happy to be kept private. And it sounds like you both use kind of this concealment as a form of shielding or protection. Tania, specific to your Through and Through series, those are landscape photographs, which have historically been kind of used as a way to kind of consume the landscape or as a tool of colonization. Can you talk a little bit more about like the specificity of the landscape photo in those?
Yeah, I think in other works, I'm also thinking, well, for example, in Only Available Light, that film, originally produced by Harlan Ingersoll Smith, called The Shuswap Indians of British Columbia. That's produced by the Department of Mines. And because, you know, historically, a lot of the first movement by settlers across Canada was for survey and for mining. And so when I start to think about that kind of history of landscape photography as dispossessing Indigenous lands, then you approach a kind of concept of landscape photography very differently, thinking through how it's been used and how it, you know, it has been in many ways a tool of associated with that dispossession. And so I think through that. I think through what that means, and I also, I think, project this sense of care and love through those works and curiosity. And I'm constantly sort of amazed by, you know, by ecologies and environments as creators, and nothing more fantastic than, you know, crystal forms and minerals that are a product of these deep time series of events, and that, you know, also include us being here today. We're part of these long processes. And so these are all ways I'm sort of thinking about what it means to not only picture the land, but to refer to and from the land within that process. And so I haven't done a lot of imaging of the land that doesn't use some kind of device, whether that be using analog filters on digital images, or alternative process photography, or these ways of imaging through crystals, which are disguising, shielding, refracting, and making an image something that we have to work a bit harder to move through. You know, especially at a time when images are just like saturating our environments. I think I want to complicate them and undermine them in a way that that helps me to do the work of understanding them.
Thank you. Yes, these material interventions are present in both of your practices. I think especially in terms of adornment, with the bright colors and the beadwork and the fringing. I would love to hear a bit more about what drives these material choices for you, maybe what they're referencing, and kind of how they relate to maybe the value of cultural objects that you had been discussing before.
I think the image is up there. It was of rattle. And so it was the first time I brought beadwork into the gallery space, and it was specifically to show the value of this incredible beadwork. And there's still those, I think that was sort of in the late 90s, I can't remember when, but just that, you know, the conversation of, is it art or is it craft? And as we know, the beads now, or, you know, the beads are sort of dominating. Beads and fringe are sort of, dominating contemporary Indigenous art majorly. And so I think it's a look back to beadwork, but also if we think of sort of aesthetic imperialism or the criminalization of culture, how these things waned. But beadwork still was there, certainly within the Plains culture, for powwow. Like, it just, even though powwows were even outlawed, people still secretly beaded. And I'm always very grateful to powwow dancers, because they're fully beaded all the time, you know? And then, but now to take that method and those materials and make contemporary art about it, and all kinds of art, and some very poignant political art through beadwork, or even through basketry. Certainly thinking about the basketry work that Brenda Crabtree does, for instance, because there's only a few people who even make baskets, so that waned pretty hard. And so I have an image here of a little tiny bottle by Primrose Adams, the great Haida weaver. And when she was 50 years old, she traveled to the different museums and she taught herself to weave at 50 years old. And then she came back to Haida Gwaii and taught her family and other members how to weave. And so I find that quite remarkable, but I have a very humble little bottles of hers, but she wove many, many things, and also, you know, how to harvest spruce root, and then cedar, of course. So, but with beadwork, and especially with the headdress series, is that, you know, wanting to acknowledge the beauty of it, the skill that it takes to make it, and that also how it exists and circulates in the world, and it's all on the body. Like, it's on the body. And even thinking about my own Lakota aesthetics, it's all on the body. And but then with the fringe, because the fringe is very specific, like if you see grass dancers or contemporary or traditional women's, it's all about how they move the fringe. And it's a skill. It's not just random. It's not just hectic. You have to move it a certain way, and it has to just gracefully sometimes just sweep across the grass. And so all of the dances are in relation to the natural world. Men's grass is all based on how the prairie grass moves. And women's fancy shawl is all based on how the butterfly moves. They're all relational to the natural world. And so to see so much fringe, how we're using fringe within our work, and, you know, many cultures have fringe, many cultures have beads, but just thinking about in North America in terms of the criminalization of culture and imperial aesthetics, the fact that they continued, you know, is remarkable. And, you know, so that little bottle to me, that little woven bottle represents so much, because through, you know, through many challenges, Primrose at 50 taught herself how to do that work. So looking at, so I chose that in relation to Tania's basket work that she has shown here, and then this basket collection that I started to just to acknowledge women's work, and that it continues, because it's in a delicate place. Basket making is in a very delicate place. And within my own Lakota cultures, we weave yellow, or not yellow cedar, red willow. And so only a few people still do that. So basketry making is still very challenged.
I mean, you put that so beautifully. Yeah, I mean, I like a lot of the works in the show, I was unfulfilled with them just within their frame, the rectangle, and I started to introduce materiality in ways that I thought were beautiful and suggested movement. And of course, they have echoes of powwow, and also just Secwepemc regalia is a lot of fringe and ochre and less so beads. Now obviously we have all kinds of beautiful ways of dressing and designers and different things. But I was also thinking of those ways in which all of our adornment historically comes from the land. And so when I moved back home and thought through what it meant to be making work in connection to my land and how we interact with our environments, I started to think a lot about natural materials, and also then changes to those forms. And also, I think in this show, the really long fringe, I'm also thinking of it as a kind of a waterfall. Even though that's an image of dry grass, I think about the way water can scatter and refract and diffract an image. And so I'm thinking of it also as this way of suggesting other kinds of movement. And also, I just love it. We can't, I just love some fringe. So, yeah. But yeah, and then of course you're picking up also, and we have this interesting conversation between us in terms of basketry, and the show, has certain forms of my research and connection to basketry, but tomorrow I'll open a community show where I've been working with my mentor and teacher, Dolores Purdyby, who is an amazing basketry artist. She's trained in birch bark and cedar root, and she is a master. She still makes cedar root baskets that are that are huge, and she inspires me all the time, and yet her work is completely undervalued, not placed within a conversation, and I hope that will change, and anybody wants her number, she does classes, she's amazing, as well as several other practitioners, but cedar root basketry in particular, Stuk, that is one that is not having as many practitioners, and so this community exhibition, we've been working for 2.5 years, both to harvest and learn to prepare the material, and also to learn it's a coiled basketry technique, to coil baskets, and also to work through Secwepemc language for the materials and the process as well. And so, this work also represents exactly all these different levels that I'm learning from family, from community, and from land. And, fringe turned horizontally and coiled is also, a basket. There's always these strands that are either connecting to the land, like in this way of sweeping the fringe to the land, or in some ways they're also coiling in the basket works.
So I love fringe so much. I love me some
Let's get
fringe.
into it, exactly.
I love that line. I love me some fringe. So I wanted to be a fringe. And so I think there's an image there where I was doing a performance at the Met. And so I just became this big fringe and just went on stage and just was a fringe for a long time, wearing headphones, and they couldn't hear the music. And so I just was a fringe. And then I think there was another work where I ripped the fringe it was a performance. And so it's
The dirt worshiper piece.
Dirt worshiper piece, yeah.
Beautiful piece.
Thank you. Well, I'll just say about dirt worshiper. So I'm thinking too about foundationally, and I think this is something that Tania and I share, is that, cultural teachings are the foundation of our work, but also the socio-political is within our work as well. And so with dirt worshiper, that was a term from that HBO series Deadwood. I'm just curious, did anybody watch Deadwood? Oh, really? There's not very many people. It was so amazing, and it was this sort of Western that it was really bad. Like the language was awful, and it was really the really worst. But one of the names that they called Indigenous people was dirt worshiper, and I loved that term. I thought, yes, call me a dirt worshiper.
I'm a convert.
Yeah. And so that's what that work is based on. But I encourage you all to watch Deadwood. It was an amazing show. I'm still inspired by it. I made this work. I made one of my Deadwood Indians. It just, yeah.
I too love fringe. I think there's also something really interesting and beautiful, both in like dirt worshiper and just like being here on site watching you do the labor of the fringe, which adds something really extra to the work. Alongside being these incredible artists, you are also both curators. And as we were talking about kind of this value of material and this like idea of craft versus art, this kind of relates well to Dana, one of your early curatorial exhibitions, First Ladies, at Pitt Gallery in 1992. which noted a shift in the way that Indigenous art was being viewed at the time, kind of beginning just at the beginning of moving past these categories as like artifact and craft that have historically been used to divide it. So I would love to hear your perspectives on how you feel these perspectives on Indigenous art and what it has to offer have kind of changed or developed over the years since then.
Yeah, I mean, I will simply just use this opportunity to really thank Dana for her incredible work, for being, you know, somebody who is traveling down a path that others can start to see. And I think that that work is challenging and beautiful. And, you know, maybe you're pointing to that work at that time for, you know, these conversations, but that work affects me as well. And that way of moving, I think we can't underestimate who it touches and how it affects and shapes our worlds. So Cook's Jam, thank you.
I was thinking there was somebody here from the Pitt Gallery. Bruce is here. And so when I started working at the Pitt Gallery, I actually didn't even know what a curator was. And I sort of got thrown into a situation and then realized that that was a place for me to be in the gallery. And the first show was Neo-Nativist, which I worked on with some other people. And then it was Mike McDonald who asked me to co-curate that show with him. And so in many ways, First Ladies really influenced Curve, the show of the Northwest Coast Women Carvers. It really influenced that so many years later. And but you know, we wanted to do a book for that, but we never did do a book for that show. But you know, it was Joan Cardinal Schubert. I mean, she was sort of the generation before me, and the work that she had done. And of course, before her was Daphne Odjeg, and you know, so there was, you know, I was following in their footsteps of the path that they had laid forward, but hadn't quite realized what I was doing completely, right? And but also being influenced by Vancouver. You know, there's many, you know, the Artist Run Center movement is completely foundational to my own learning as an artist and a curator and an arts administrator. And Spirit Song, which was, you know, I learned to be an administrator was through Spirit Song. And some of you might know it was, you know, it was a creative place for all Indigenous contemporary people who wanted to, were coming to the city, because there was people from all over Canada coming to Vancouver. And it was interesting because so many people, they trained us in theater and they trained me in arts administration. But most people and they were all Indigenous actors or creatives, really, and they came to Vancouver because of Chief Dan George. So they like, why did you come to Vancouver? Chief Dan George, Chief Dan George. And so then, you know, there was this theater group that actually his son started, Leonard George and Margot Kane, and some other people from Musqueam. So that was a site of activity, creative activity. And so my own cohort from there, you know, Marie Clements, Russell Wallace, like there was many of us that came out of that program, and then were creatives. And then it was natural to go into the artist-run centers and, you know, hang out with the Paul Wong and Glenn Alteens of the world. But, you know, I think we're going to talk about it after, about Indian acts, but, you know, how, but very inspired by what I learned from that artists can be curators as well. I didn't know that, and I learned that through artist-run center culture.
Thank you. And yes, great little pre-transition for me for the Indian X question. One of the early projects you worked on together was the Indian Acts Aboriginal Performance Art website as part of Grunt Gallery's Activating the Archive, which was turning this 3-day conference into a website that documented and reflected the events that took place during that time. And Tania, you touched a little bit on the archive and how it can be a place where Indigenous people have been left unnamed, as seen in a couple of your works in our exhibition, such as Vestige and Votive. but also how we can reclaim the archive for the use of future Indigenous peoples, as noted on the Indian Act's website. So I'd love to hear more about how you work with the archive and what your relationship has been like with it, or how it's developed over the years, either in your artistic or curatorial practices.
Well, it's a complicated relationship. I'm always, and I think some works in the exhibition are really speaking to that. Like I explained this experience with historical images of our communities, not by our people, and its association with a period of time, with the intensity and cruelty of the colonial project. And so the works on sandpaper are really thinking through the difficulty of the archive. Those two images in Vestige and Votive I encountered while I was co-curating and looking at the material in the Uno Langman collection, but they were from, they're labeled Secwepemc or Shuswap women, which is my community, and there is not a lot in the archive for interior Salish people, and there tends to be a focus anthropologically in communities on the coast. And so there is this interest in looking at this image and thinking about it and seeing it as representative when there hasn't been a lot of other representation. But then, of course, it's so complicated. I don't know if they agreed that they're postcards. I don't know if the photographer, well, they're not named. So, and then there's images circulating, and there was a lot of postcards in that collection. So a lot of both individuals and groups, and a lot of elders. There was like a trend at the time to photograph the oldest looking Indigenous person and then make a postcard of it. Paige Rabaman wrote an essay in Nunitch a bit about that. So those images I found to be abrasive, and I had to do a lot of work. And so this medium of sandpaper starts to come in as a method for me to understand that these histories are abrasive, that they represent a kind of labor, and they're a process of burning the image in, and it's also a process that's difficult to control. It's not a stable art material, and so they're a way for me to think through the complications of the image, because also I want to see it, but I don't have permission from those families, and that is, of course, how I would like to proceed, but the circumstances of that are difficult to navigate. And then also, who should be charged with that task? The person who maybe took the photograph originally, or the collection it ended up in, and then down the line it eventually, if I start to use the image, that process gets put on me, but after these many layers of removal of the colonial project. And so I had to find ways to understand that, and sandpaper became a way to do that. I feel like I went off track. Okay, I was like, what? Sandpaper. Oh, but maybe I'll say one other thing about sandpaper. It's like, it's very specific sandpaper because also it's garnet sandpaper, which is used in sandblasting. And so I was very specific with the original work with what kind of sandpaper I was using, because it also, of course, is January's birthday stone, but it has a crystal form. And so I was really thinking about land value and dispossession and extraction, and the garnet sandpaper became a way to think about both this like beautiful crystal form that we value and the variable systems of value we have for, and also, within land on Indian Reserve, how that value is very much under the Indian Act and is devalued. And so I was thinking of all these systems of value, and an expression of that became the raw mineral form versus a kind of crystal gem form. And so it took me a while to like order enough of that particular kind of sandpaper, but.
Thank you. I have time for one more question from me before we switch over to audience Q&A. You both have made really incredible contributions to community building and leadership in the art community, the curatorial community, in your Indigenous communities, and the broader. And it would be great to hear about your process of working with and in these institutional places, and maybe the moments where you've had to make your own spaces.
Can I just say two quick things about the archive?
Yes.
Well, thank goodness now there's sort of, you have to sign ethical forms when you're, doing certain research within Indigenous communities, right? And that they are fraught sites when we're looking at Indigenous representation in the archive. And, but then how useful archives can be for, for finding information. And I know that when I did the redacted FBI documents, that was through going through an archive of actually Sioux war history in the library at the New York Library, because so much of it was Sioux history was in the war library, and then found those lovely documents there. But also just thinking about the fawns at UBC recently. Well, last summer I spent about 3 weeks going through rare books, looking at BC Binning's archive, and wanting to find more information about him and what he's bequeathed to our department. And it was so useful, just all of the letters that he had written to funders, to see how he thought and his language, and that it supported us making some changes. But so on one hand, they can be fraught places, certainly when it comes to Indigenous stuff. But and so many archives now, of course, are trying to change their methodologies, and and being so careful about what they're putting in there and how they're labeling it. But there's a lot of work still to do. But the archive's being decolonized, but it's a slow process. But also, people don't quite know what to do. But they're trying.
I want to suggest, and I do suggest in the show, that there are other types of archive, and I'm thinking of those crystals and basketry as an archive. I'm thinking of them in terms of the future berries they can hold. I'm thinking of them in terms of the knowledges of harvest and ecologies that they hold, and that they themselves are a kind of a data storage device if we are thinking differently. And so I am sometimes engaged with, I don't know about like finding or making new spaces, but being responsive and changing my value system to value the kinds of spaces for art that are on the land, that don't have infrastructure, because, historically with the Massey Levesque report and where Canada invested in art, it was, cities, universities, art galleries, and where I live is quite outside of that. And I had to really think and change the ways I was thinking about how much love and shelter and connection the land provides. And I had to think, well, okay, from a Secwepemc worldview, from what I'm learning from my elders and communities, like our gallery is the land. That's where we're going to get materials. That's how we're expressing ourselves. And so that kind of space collectively I am an activator of it, along with other artists, Gabriel Hill, Janine Freyna-Jutli, Peter Morin, my family, and all the non-human and elemental place, everything that interacts in that place to make an ecology. And that became a more productive and generative way for me to think about, I love the gallery space, but also it doesn't contain everything. And I'm always wanting art to do a little bit more, I think. And I realized that the land can do that. The way that things are connected to sustain, nourish, and constantly the cycles that are happening became really inspiring for me as a way to think through what I was doing.
So I think in terms of creating new space and thinking about when Tanya and I first met, and is that for Image Nation, when we started the film festival and the training program for Indigenous youth, is that it really was Shelley Nero's feature film that she had made, and Honey Moccasin, and it wasn't getting picked up by any of the film festivals. And I remember I was outraged that the Vancouver Film Festival didn't show it, just because it was the first time an Indigenous woman had written and produced a feature film, and nobody was showing it. And so we started our own film festival. And so thank you. And it went on for like almost 10 years, and we gave it to the next generation. It didn't quite work out, but it was very solid, and it did a lot of great things. And it also inspired, of course, Imaginative in Toronto, which has continued to go. But, we just had to start our own, and thinking about Red Wire, what Tanya and the Native Youth Movement did there with that publication, and then with her Bush Gallery, and and then, of course, your Indigenous Intensive, which is within the institution and the academy. And so even though there's sort of bureaucratic structures, they still allow for, I think, Indigenous autonomy, because you basically just carry it wherever you go. And so, I've never found these, the oppressive structures of bureaucratic institutions, because, you can reside there autonomously and just sort of ignore the noise and just do what it is that you need to get done. And so there, even though we didn't start a university, but we can still be within those.
Who knows? No.
We can still be within those structures and do many things for our communities and for the next generation and for youth and those kind of things.
Wonderful. Thank you both so much for your generous answers. Now we are going to switch over for a little bit of time for audience Q&A.
Thank you for your presentation. The curator occupies that space between the art and the public. So you're all served as curators, so I'm wondering how you strike the balance between letting the art speak and cueing the public's response.
I think maybe, the idea of creating what you want to see in the world, or Leanne Simpson's idea of world building has been important to me once she articulated that, to think through this idea of needing to create other spaces. And so I think when I first started curating, I was thinking about different publics in terms of who was coming to the gallery and the kinds of the ways in which I was operating, and there didn't seem to be a lot of other Indigenous people coming to the gallery. And so that's part of, I had the honor of showing some great artists, and that was changing, and but I wasn't seeing the same amount of people coming to the show. And so I had to think about different kind of publics, and actually, in some ways, Bush Gallery's activation also is a response to that. Like, I had a solo show in Kamloops a number of years ago, Kamloops Art Gallery, which I'm so grateful for them, but not a lot of community came to that show. And because the gallery wasn't a familiar space, it maybe not necessarily welcoming all the time in terms of it being not familiar. And so I really thought through, okay, well, instead of doing this in the gallery and asking people to come to me in this gallery form, it really kind of led me to activate things on my land and where I was living, and to think of audience very differently. So, I think my answer is more that I am thinking through publics, and that's leading to a response that maybe is changing the form of curating that I'm engaging with. But
oh, there's a question right at the back. I'll be right there.
Thank you both for that wonderful kuchtam, for that beautiful presentation. And I love this dialogue between the two of you. And I know you, Tania, a little bit from conversations in the past. You were so generous with me when I wanted to talk to you about doing my particular research, which was really based on urban indigeneity and the politics of place in Vancouver. And it was kind of more of an observation, but I think in the beginning it was so interesting the way that you were talking, Dana, about your work as being kind of like in a studio and quite controlled. And then what you were saying, Tania, about letting the land speak through the work and that being more of a collaborative relationship type of thing to the land. And it strikes me that both of you are very, very akin in how you, in that particular aspect, in the sense that for me, like I grew up in a rural native village, but I lived in East Van for many, many years. So for me, the idea of the urban is kind of like, it is what you make it, you know? And so the idea of making Indigenous art or work as an Indigenous person from an urban setting, i.e. Vancouver, is really similar in a way to your process of the Bush Gallery. What I just sense that there's a lot of connection there, and it resonates for me in really deep ways, both of your work. And I think it sort of resides very closely together.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I agree. I mean, Dana has been an incredible mentor. And so, yeah, absolutely. And so I work in a different way, but there are many things that we are sharing concerns and interest and time and work for.
Hi, really great to hear you talking. The world is a very weird place right now. It's a lot of upheaval. Where's your interest? What inspires you now? And how are you making work now? And why?
That's a big question. So what was it?
Why are you, what's inspiring and why are you?
Inspiring you now in this complicated
place called the world.
Into the microphone.
I am inspired by all of my test strips that I've saved for the last about 25 years now. So I'm just working with those and looking at them and thinking about proofing. When you were saying about your process, it just happens. I'm like, oh my gosh, I have so many, we test. For me, photography is all about testing. Test strips to make sure the hand is perfect or the eye's perfect or so it's a lot of test strips I have. So now I'm working with those as a work of art in themselves. And, I just think that the world's been crazy for a long time. And just, without sounding cliche, it's just being televised. But, there's been many pandemics. Indigenous people have went through many pandemics, and just a lot of chaos and a lot of war and a lot of bloodshed. So I just don't think the world is any crazier than it's ever been. I think it's always has been. And so, and not that I'm not affected by it, but I still like to celebrate, joy and beauty, right? I mean, otherwise it wins, right? So we always need to, stay in hope. There's the politics of hope. What is that? And so I'm try to reside there. But still pissed off.
Yeah, I mean, I highlight ongoing injustice of Indigenous land within my work, because Secwepemc territory, like many territories, Indigenous territories in BC, is unceded land, and that means something real for me and my family and how I see my community and the economic disadvantages and the many layers of effects of colonization that are there. But I also think I need to operate. You can have all the debates about it, but like in my body, in my life, in my world as a parent, I need to operate from a place that situates me joyfully amidst the complications amidst the horror. And also, yes, there has been many apocalypses of indigenous lands. My dad is a hunter. He grew up hunting at age 12 in the hills around where we live. He learned from his great-grandfather. He still, just a few years ago, was chased off of our territory by settlers with rifles patrolling their large farm. And telling him he can't hunt there, and he's like, I've been hunting here since, I don't even know who you are. And that's in the record in terms of how Suquamish people are fenced out of their territories. And when Marianne and Ronald Ignace have a great volume of work that talks about a lot of these interactions through settler programs, through survey, in all these ways. But I need to operate in a way that says, yes, all those things are happening, and expressions of colonial violence and horror, of course, are all over right now. And certainly I resonate and think about what's happening in Gaza and thinking about the colonial project. Yeah, of course, we're all thinking about it. So, but for my work and what I need to operate from a place of, care and outrage, as you're saying. Yeah. We have to care for ourselves. I think that's what it is. It's like we have to care for ourselves amidst the outrage as well. And that, in a sense, is also caring for each other. I need to believe that there is a world as my children grow that they can connect to, and that those projects are long, and we still don't have rights to our territory, but I hope that what they've learned through language, through culture, through connection affects how they will experience and demand their rights, and who knows, where we'll be with such great examples of people who have been fierce, who have spoken up, who have been creative and joyful, and all these things. And I'm thinking about plants. So that's what I'm thinking about, plants. I'm thinking a lot about plants lately, and the power of plants. So, I'm thinking of the forest around me, and I take time to learn about different plants around me, and I think they're incredibly powerful. And so that's, you asked about directions of work, and that gives me joy and connection to work with plant kin. And so I'm thinking about the power of plants.
We have one more question. Bravo. One last question here.
Thank you all. I found it really delightful to read the labels on some of the pieces in the show and see the artwork of one artist in the collection of another artist, and it was also on some of these labels as well. And so I was wondering if maybe you could extend some of your comments on curation and the archive to thinking about personal collecting and maybe friendship also as well. But we live in an art world, I think, where there's often a lot of spotlight on the individual artist and the kind of rush to capture something for the collection. And I just wonder if you could talk about kind of decolonizing, but not even that grand language, just the intimacy of personal collecting and friendship and stewardship of art on an individual level. Thanks.
That's a great question, so thank you for that. And, it's really been of the amazing, for me, when I became an art collector, because I make art, I write about art, I teach art, I curate art, but then collecting art was sort of the last. I hadn't planned that, of course, and I became completely obsessed, which I'm told that's what makes a good art collector. But it really was through the great gifts of getting arts awards as an artist and having that extra income capital to think, what am I going to do with this? And what's been so uplifting for me has been art. You know, art with a capital A. Art is a boy and a girl, not art, you know, but art is, and so wanted to make an art collection. I remember I was telling Paul Wong about it. Sorry, he's just sitting right here. But I was telling him about it, and I said, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to, you know, take this award, and I'm going to make a collection of Northwest Coast women's art, and then I'm going to have a show and make a book. And then he said to me, did you have a vision? But it just was, you know, being in that position of privilege to think, wow, I can actually make an art collection. And it was very specific and very focused, and it's still building. But then now I've sort of, I think I've completed the Northwest Coast collection now, and so now I'm building another one. And it's been really through the generosity that art has given me, and so wanting to be reciprocal to art, and living artists as well. You know, I mean, how many Valentino bags can a girl have?
I mean, do I need to add anything? I just, like, I don't really need to add anything, so.
Well, that is a wonderful place to end.
No, that's not in there. No, okay, I will add something, okay. Okay, collections, and I mean, I'm so thrilled that Dana, you know, that Dana lent work to the show, that Dana collected my work. That's, I mean, that means so much. Of course, it's very valuable and amazing to be in collections, but to have somebody who, you know, I've thought of as a mentor, who I've learned from, you know, purchase and care for and be invested in work that you create is something else entirely. It's such an honor. So, you know, it's such an incredible honor to have that stewardship of the work. And collections, I think, are also about supporting artists directly. So, yes, it's great to have a work in somebody's collection, but I've also, you know, worked hard to work giving opportunities and conversation and places to connect as artists. I think that's essential, you know, for people who are collecting and institutions who are supporting. You know, we also need to support artists to, you know, residencies and models where artists are coming together, because you don't get to the final work, you don't get to a solo show and a final work without conversation and connection with other artists and supporters, and so that is, yeah, really meaningful to me.
That is a wonderful place to end. I just want to extend another big, warm thank you to both of you for sharing so generously. It has been really wonderful to be here in conversation with you all tonight. And thank you to everyone who came out and made this event so full and lively. If you have not seen Tania Willard Photolithics, it is on until May 24th. And perhaps as you exit, maybe you'll want to peruse the catalogs of Tania and Dana in our bookstore as you head out. Thank you, everyone, for coming out tonight.
Thank you to Serena, Serena, for guiding our conversation. You are awesome. Thank you, thank you.